When it comes to medical devices in healthcare, what are the key vulnerabilities that we're talking about?
Well, one of the problems is there are vulnerabilities everywhere, and so the hard part is deciding which ones require immediate attention. And so that's a very risk management based decision. So they're literally all over the place. But I think from a provider's perspective, one of the most effective techniques right now is to include security and privacy in the procurement steps when actually talking with vendors, but also when security and privacy problems crop up, to report that to the appropriate authorities so that the community has a better understanding of what are the most important vulnerabilities.
How do you how do you get that into the conversation with the vendor? What kind of questions should a provider be asking a vendor about privacy and security of medical devices?
Yeah, well, a provider should be looking to see how open the vendor is to talking about the security architecture of the system. One thing that would cause me to run away from a vendor would be, oh, it's proprietary, I can't tell you about the security. That's usually code for they don't have a story. So there are certain sort of hat tip ways, or excuse me, ways that you can figure it out, but they're not going to shine a light on you and say, no, we don't have any security issues, or we do have security problems. You're going to have to figure that out through the social cues.
What are the greatest dangers that unsecured medical devices present?
Well, medical devices save lives every day, and so I think most people realize they're here to do good. On the other hand, you hear reports about hacking and so on, and although there are issues going on, especially in the lab, I think the two most important issues are the availability of these devices to deliver patient care, as well as the integrity of the device, making sure that the device is performing as it was designed to do.
Actually, devices is a pretty broad term. Do you put them into certain classifications or categories? What kind of devices are we talking about?
So there are thousands of medical devices, many, if not most of which, use software. And there are tons of classifications, but the two kinds of things I would consider most important are whether it falls into what's known as the 510K classification, it's some regulatory language, or whether it falls into the PMA, or pre-market approval. Tends to be the higher risk devices fall into the PMA class, things like pacemakers, defibrillators, life-sustaining devices. They generally will have greater consequences if something goes wrong, and so I would care about having security there. The 510K process is generally for lower risk devices. It can still cause patient injury and harm, and you do need to be concerned about meeting security specifications, but the PMA devices are at a higher level.
What are the biggest threats that an IT department or at the C-suite should be looking for in device security?
So if the question is about sort of threats external to the hospital, I'd be concerned today about malware that just happens to break into a device that's in a hospital network, not because of anyone who's intending to cause harm, but because the device just happens to run, say, Windows XP or a commodity operating system that's vulnerable to very run-of-the-mill malware. And when malware breaks into one of these devices, typical outcomes are device is unable to provide care, so it's taken out of service and then has to go in for repair, or the integrity gets damaged. You keep using this device, but for some reason it's not working quite as well as it was supposed to. And that's a very different kind of risk.
I guess it is a danger if the defibrillator isn't working properly. So in that sense, then, what would you tell a provider, a hospital, to do to ensure that this doesn't happen, or do they check their devices regularly? Is there a process they should be going through to make sure that there isn't malware in there?
Well, I think there's a multi-pronged approach. There's sort of pre-market, post-market, everything in between. So before you actually get the device, assuming you have that opportunity, you want to think about how do you put information security requirements into the procurement when you're going out to buy things from vendors. I know of some hospitals who are extremely detailed about the security requirements and they refuse to make purchases if the vendor isn't willing to be forthcoming about the security limitations and also the architecture. So don't take no for an answer. If a vendor says, I'm sorry, I can't tell you, that's proprietary, move on. The second, though, is more post-market. In other words, you have a device, you've already plunked down whatever your $1 million on a suite of devices. Now what? For some devices, there are antivirus solutions. They're not perfect, but they can reduce risk. People have resorted to using all sorts of isolation technologies, sort of band-aids, basically. But the problem is malware will always find a way in. I don't care if you tell me it's a completely isolated network off the internet, malware will get in there. Believe me, it will. Vendors have actually infected devices on their own by accident. When the contractor comes in to update software, they've accidentally brought malware from home. Nurses have been reported to actually accidentally introduce malware into the system through USB drives. So malware will always find a way, and the important thing is to be able to at least detect it and then better prevent it from causing any kind of unavailability of care or damage to the integrity.
Kevin, thank you very much.
All right, thank you.